Hello, my name is Cynthia Campbell, and I'm pleased to have been the author of the foundation essay for this unit of practice on forgive. Up until about a year and a half ago, I served as pastor of the Highland Presbyterian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. I've also spent a good deal of time in my past as a theological educator on the faculty at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and then as a professor and president at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. All along the way, it's been my privilege to work with adults primarily in congregations across the country, and I'm so pleased to be part of this curriculum that helps us understand how our faith isn't just ideas, but is about the things that we embody and live in our everyday lives. The second aspect of the practice of forgiveness is receiving forgiveness. Being willing to take into ourselves the forgiveness that God extends to us each and every time we say a prayer of confession, or we come to God at the end of a day saying, this is where I've fallen short. It's very important that when we do that, we open ourselves to receive into ourselves the forgiveness, the letting go that God has done of the sin that we have committed. Allowing ourselves to be forgiven means setting down a burden of shame and guilt. Now, this may be more difficult, actually, than it seems, despite the fact that all Christians, and not just Protestants, agree that we have been saved by God's grace, which is an utterly free gift. All of us as Christians, Protestants as well as Catholics, still think that we somehow need to merit God's goodness or even God's love. Centuries of Christian preaching has used the image of God as a judge in a courtroom who weighs our sins in a balance against good deeds and ultimately rewards good behavior, but punishes the bad. And in that image, there is precious little room for forgiveness. The problem with that image, aside from the fact that it keeps us trapped in guilt and shame, is that it ignores another deeply biblical, I would say even more biblical view of God. We find this particularly on display in the Psalms. I believe it's those Psalm texts that really stand behind Jesus's understanding of God's forgiveness. Psalm 103 in particular tells us about how God's nature is to forgive. That God is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love or mercy. That God's compassion is over all. And the psalmist says, as far as east is from west, that's how much distance God puts between us and our sin. The psalmist doesn't qualify what sins merit this love and what don't. In fact, this seems to be a rather blanket message. It reminds me, in fact, of Jesus saying that God makes the sun to shine and the rain to fall on the just and on the unjust alike. The goodness of God is extended to everyone. So in this session, we're invited to reflect on the loving Father who has been waiting and watching for his son to come home. This Father runs because he's been on the watch. He is not running, notice, to upbraid his son or to humiliate him or to make him pay for what he did. The father's only and immediate instinct is to welcome his son home. The son doesn't have to earn his place back in the family because he never left his father's heart. In the process of reflecting on this, you're invited to a couple of practices. One would be to read John 8, the famous story of Jesus and the woman taken in adultery, who's brought to him, thrown at his feet to be publicly humiliated. Jesus invites onlookers to cast the first stone, whoever is without sin. It takes time, but everybody eventually walks away. Imagine yourself on the receiving end of Jesus' compassion in that moment. Think about what you need to set down. Receive God's permission to set it down and to rise up a new person. And that's receiving forgiveness.